The quiet suburban street hums with stillness under the moonlight as Judge Naomi Pierce drives home from a charity event. She's in her modest sedan, still in the elegant dress she wore to the event, reflecting on the fulfilling work she's done that evening. As a judge and community leader, she's often seen as a beacon of hope in her community. But tonight, she's just Naomi, on her way home, enjoying the peaceful ride. The sound of a siren shatters the calm, and Naomi glances in her rearview mirror. A police car has pulled up behind her, the flashing lights painting her rearview mirror in red and blue. Naomi sighs, glancing at the clock. It's late, but she's done nothing wrong. She pulls over and turns off the engine, rolling down her window as Officer Chad Reynolds steps up to her car. His posture is stiff, his expression unfriendly. Naomi smiles politely, trying to maintain her composure. "Good evening, officer," Naomi says, her voice calm. "Is there a problem?" Chad's gaze sweeps over her, lingering too long before he speaks. "License and registration?" he demands, his tone sharp. Naomi raises an eyebrow, but she doesn't let her calm exterior falter. "I wasn't speeding, officer, but here's my information." She hands over the documents and watches him as he scans them, still holding an uncomfortable silence between them. She's unsure why she's being stopped, but she knows the rules. She's a judge. She knows her rights. Chad takes his time examining the papers, his eyes narrowing slightly before he speaks again. "What are you doing in this neighborhood? This isn't exactly your kind of area." Naomi is taken aback for a moment. The implication in his words is clear. He's questioning whether she belongs here at all. She meets his gaze steadily, her voice even. "I'm heading home. Is there a reason for this treatment, officer?" Chad doesn't answer immediately. He stands there for a beat, sizing her up with a mixture of suspicion and frustration. Naomi's calm demeanor seems to irritate him more, and he takes a step closer to her car, his hand resting on his belt as he looks her over. "You can step out of the car," Chad orders, his voice hardening. Naomi's expression falters for a moment, her calmness slowly giving way to confusion. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. Why am I being asked to get out of my car?" "Get out now," Chad snaps, his tone rising. "You're resisting. Step out of the car or I'll arrest you." Naomi's heart races, but she knows she must remain composed. She speaks calmly again. "Officer, I have done nothing to warrant arrest. Please, I would like to know what's going on." Without warning, Chad yanks her from the car, slamming her hands behind her back and roughly slapping the cuffs on her wrists. Naomi gasps in shock, but she says nothing, trying to remain composed. The flashing lights reflect in her rearview mirror as she's forced into the back of the patrol car, her mind spinning in disbelief. "You're under arrest," Chad mutters as he slams the door behind her. Naomi's heart aches as she's driven away from the quiet suburban street that should have been a peaceful end to her evening. Naomi's world is turned upside down as she is driven to the police station. The flashing lights of the patrol car reflect off the pavement as she is led into the station, still in handcuffs. The officers at the front desk barely glance up at her as she's processed, despite her repeated requests for an explanation. "Name?" the officer asks, barely acknowledging her presence. "Judge Naomi Pierce," she responds calmly, keeping her voice steady. "I have the right to know why I'm being detained." The officer doesn't seem to register her words and continues with the procedure, typing into the computer as if she's just another name on a list. Naomi's patience wears thin, but she refuses to let the situation escalate. She's been through far worse in her career and knows how to keep her composure. As she's escorted to a small holding cell, Naomi notices other officers eyeing her warily, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. They whisper among themselves, exchanging glances, but none of them step forward to intervene. She realizes that while they may not condone Chad's behavior, none are willing to challenge him. Once inside the cell, Naomi takes a deep breath and sits down on the cold bench, her mind racing. She knows she's done nothing wrong, yet she's being treated like a criminal. She's a judge, an upstanding member of her community. And yet, here she is. A few minutes later, Chad walks into the cell, his smug expression evident. He leans against the bars, looking down at Naomi with disdain. "Guess you're not so high and mighty now, are you?" Chad sneers, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Naomi remains silent for a moment, her anger bubbling beneath the surface, but she stays composed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she says quietly, her eyes fixed on him. She wants to make him understand that she is not some helpless victim, but she also knows that responding with rage will only fuel his animosity. Chad laughs, clearly amused. "Yeah, right. Keep dreaming," he says dismissively, turning on his heel and walking out of the room. Naomi clenches her fists, resisting the urge to lash out. She sits quietly, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle in. She's been humiliated, treated unfairly, and yet she knows she must remain strong. The only thing that matters now is getting out of here and proving her innocence. Hours pass, and Naomi continues to sit in the sterile cell, the cold concrete floor beneath her feet. She never loses her composure, but the waiting is unbearable. Her mind drifts back to the events of the day, the unjust treatment, the confusion, the sudden shift from a respected judge to a criminal in the eyes of the law. But her resolve only grows stronger. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, her lawyer arrives, his briefcase in hand. He approaches the desk, demanding her release and pointing out the baseless charges against her. Naomi stands tall as the officer reluctantly unlocks the cell. "This is outrageous," her lawyer says, clearly infuriated by the situation. "Judge Naomi Pierce has been detained without any cause, and you will answer for this." Chad, still standing in the background, mutters under his breath, "She probably got off easy because of connections." Naomi doesn't let the comment affect her. She's been through too much in her life to let an ignorant remark from a man like Chad tear her down. With a sense of dignity, she walks out of the cell, her head held high. As she exits the station, she knows this is only the beginning of a long fight for justice, one she will not back down from. The sound of footsteps echoes in the quiet courtroom as the door opens, and Officer Chad Reynolds walks in. His shoulders are squared, his chest puffed with an air of arrogance, the same pride he's carried with him throughout his career. He's sure this will be another minor reprimand, a scolding at most, and then life will continue as normal. After all, he's been a cop for years, and he knows how to play the game. But as he enters the room and the murmurs die down, his eyes lock with the person sitting at the bench. Naomi Pierce. His stomach drops. Her face, usually warm and welcoming, is set in a stern, almost unreadable expression. She's dressed in her full judicial regalia, a striking contrast to the man she is now about to judge. Chad's heart skips a beat as he suddenly realizes the weight of what's about to unfold. This is not going to be like any hearing he's attended before. Naomi clears her throat, her voice ringing out with authority. This hearing concerns the actions of Officer Chad Reynolds during a traffic stop on the night of insert date. Officer Reynolds, please take the stand. Chad steps forward, his confident stride faltering slightly. His mind races. Naomi was just a woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. His time to humiliate her had been a mere blip. He'd treated her like any other person he'd encountered on his bad days, expecting that she wouldn't be a force to be reckoned with. But now, as he stands before her in the very court she rules, he realizes just how wrong he was. Naomi looks down at him, her eyes piercing. "You've been accused of wrongful conduct, Officer Reynolds. Please explain to the court what happened during the traffic stop involving Judge Naomi Pierce." Chad stumbles over his words for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts. She was in an area where she shouldn't have been. I suspected her of speeding, and when I approached the car, I wasn't sure what to expect. It was late, and I was just doing my job." Naomi interrupts, her voice steady but firm. "And when you approached her, you assumed she didn't belong in the neighborhood based on her appearance. You accused her without cause. You humiliated her in front of your fellow officers and, despite her protests, continued to detain her. Isn't that correct?" Chad's face reddens, his breath catching. He can feel the eyes of the entire courtroom on him now, the realization hitting him hard. "I was just doing my job," he repeats, his voice defensive. She was acting suspiciously. I didn't know who she was and… Naomi cuts him off again. You didn't know who she was? Officer Reynolds? Did you even take the time to check her credentials or ask for her identification before escalating the situation? Did you make any effort to understand why she might be there at that time of night? There's a long pause. The room is silent, and all Chad can do is shift uncomfortably under Naomi's gaze. I should have handled it better, he admits, though he seems reluctant to fully accept the gravity of his actions. Naomi looks to the court, her expression resolute. You not only violated protocol, Officer Reynolds, but you also violated the trust of a member of our community. You may have seen her as just another person to push around, but what you didn't know was that she was a respected judge who had dedicated her life to upholding the law. She pauses, letting the weight of her words settle. What you didn't understand was that your actions affected more than just her. It undermines the integrity of the very system you swore to protect. And for that, Officer Reynolds, you must answer. The room feels colder, the gravity of Naomi's words echoing through the walls. Chad stands there, visibly shaken, and for the first time in his career, he realizes the full scope of his misstep. Naomi turns to the chief, her tone unwavering. I recommend a full review of Officer Reynolds' conduct. His actions that night were not just unprofessional, they were dangerous and discriminatory. He must be held accountable. Chief Harris, who had been quietly observing, nods grimly. Thank you, Judge Pierce. We will take the necessary actions. Chad, now aware of the full extent of his mistakes, swallows hard as the room waits for the next steps. He feels the sting of his arrogance slowly slipping away, replaced by the understanding that his actions, driven by bias, have consequences far beyond what he ever imagined. Naomi addresses him once more, her voice now softer but still resolute. I hope you understand the weight of what has happened here, Officer Reynolds. Justice is about fairness. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Chad can only nod, the words he wants to say caught in his throat. Naomi's gaze lingers on him for a moment before she turns her attention back to the court. This case, once just another day of business for Officer Reynolds, had become a turning point, not just for him, but for the justice system as a whole. The courtroom is thick with tension as the prosecutor begins to present the evidence against Officer Chad Reynolds. On the large screen, the dash cam footage from Chad's patrol car plays, showing the moments leading up to Naomi's arrest. The video reveals Chad's hostile tone as he approaches Naomi's vehicle, his words dripping with judgment. His voice can be heard in the video. What are you doing in this neighborhood? You don't belong here. The footage continues to show his aggressive behavior, his demand for Naomi to step out of the car despite her compliance. The video also catches her calm protests, but they fall on deaf ears. Naomi's clear request for identification is ignored, and the video reveals Chad's unnecessary escalation, his refusal to listen or de-escalate the situation. The room is quiet as the footage ends. Naomi, though composed, feels a deep, quiet anger stir within her. The video shows the raw truth of what happened, and it's undeniable. Chad's behavior was unprovoked and biased. The prosecutor then calls upon fellow officers who were on duty that night to testify. Several of them seem uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as they take the stand. One officer, Officer Samuels, admits, I didn't see what happened firsthand, but when I arrived, it was clear the situation had escalated unnecessarily. There wasn't a reason for the hostility. Another officer, Officer Jennings, who had been working nearby, says reluctantly, I didn't want to speak out at the time, but I'll be honest, the way Chad treated her, it wasn't right. She wasn't being difficult. He made her seem like a threat when she wasn't. Naomi listens intently to each testimony, her gaze unwavering. It's clear from the officers' responses that the majority feel the weight of the misconduct, but some still seem hesitant to fully confront the truth of what happened. Naomi remains silent, her expression neutral, as she absorbs their words. When the last officer sits down, the prosecutor turns to Chad. Officer Reynolds, it's your turn. Please explain your actions. Chad stands, but his usual cocky demeanor has faded. He shifts on his feet, visibly uncomfortable under Naomi's piercing gaze. I was just doing my job," he begins, his voice shaky. "She was acting suspicious. I had to be cautious." Naomi's voice cuts through his stammering words, calm but forceful. "Suspicious? Or were you making assumptions based on bias?" Chad falters, his face flushing as he tries to gather his thoughts. He stammers again. "She didn't belong in that neighborhood. I had to make sure there wasn't something off. I didn't know who she was." Naomi interrupts, her tone firm but not raised. "I see. So, you assumed she didn't belong simply because of her race and her presence in an area you thought was out of place for her? This is the very definition of profiling, Officer Reynolds." Chad opens his mouth to respond, but no words come out. His mind races, but he knows he's cornered. Naomi's words echo through the courtroom, and he can feel the weight of the evidence closing in around him. The dashcam footage, the testimonies from his colleagues, and now Naomi's pointed questions. All of it highlights the bias he let guide his actions. Naomi leans forward, her gaze still sharp. "Officer Reynolds, I believe you've made your own case. Your actions that night were not those of someone performing their duties. They were actions born from judgment, from assumptions, and from bias. Your own colleagues, those who work beside you, have admitted it." She pauses, allowing the silence in the room to settle. The pressure on Chad grows, but he doesn't have an answer. Naomi knows he understands the depth of what he's done. Naomi addresses the court once more, her voice calm yet authoritative. "This case is not just about one wrongful stop. This is about the kind of behavior that perpetuates harm, that erodes trust between law enforcement and the very people they are meant to protect. The consequences of your actions, Officer Reynolds, go far beyond this case." The room holds its breath as Naomi's words land. There's no easy way for Chad to explain himself. There's no defense he can offer that will take back the damage done. All the video, the testimonies, and his own admission have exposed the truth. He failed in his duty, and the community he swore to serve suffered for it. As Naomi concludes the hearing, she can feel the weight of the moment. This is a turning point, not just for Chad, but for everyone who looks to the justice system for fairness and protection. The seeds of accountability have been sown, and they are starting to take root. The courtroom is heavy with tension as Naomi prepares to address Officer Chad Reynolds. The weight of the case has been building up, and her words are about to deliver a lesson in accountability and justice that resonates beyond this one individual. Naomi stands up, her robes flowing with authority. She looks directly at Chad, her gaze unwavering. The room falls silent as she begins. "Officer Reynolds," she says, her voice steady but powerful, "your duty is to serve and protect, not to demean and discriminate. Your actions that night were not only unprofessional, but also rooted in prejudice. You didn't see a person who deserved respect. You saw someone to be judged based on assumptions and biases." She takes a moment, allowing the weight of her words to sink in before continuing. "This behavior, this disregard for the very people you are sworn to protect, undermines the trust that is essential between law enforcement and the community. The position you hold comes with the responsibility of maintaining that trust, and you failed to uphold it." Chad shifts uncomfortably in his seat, clearly aware that the magnitude of his actions has been laid bare. Naomi's eyes never leave him as she speaks. "Justice," Naomi continues, "is not just a job to be carried out in the courtroom. It is a way of life. It's about fairness, dignity, and respect for all people, regardless of their race, background, or status. And I've dedicated my life to upholding these principles." She pauses again, allowing the silence to hang in the air like a heavy truth. "And I won't allow individuals like you to tarnish its meaning," Naomi says firmly, her voice filled with conviction. "Not on my watch." Chad's face flushes with embarrassment, but he doesn't interrupt. He knows he is no longer in control of the situation. Naomi clears her throat before delivering her ruling. Officer Reynolds, you are hereby suspended without pay. You will also be required to attend mandatory sensitivity training to address your behavior, and you will complete community service in underprivileged neighborhoods. You need to see firsthand the very people you have failed to serve. She looks around the courtroom, her gaze sweeping over the witnesses, the officers, and the public gallery. The lessons you learn through this process should be as valuable as the badge you wear. You will not return to duty until you prove that you understand the importance of equality, respect, and fairness. Naomi's final words resonate in the courtroom. The community deserves better, the people we serve deserve better, and I will not allow this kind of injustice to stand unchallenged. With that, she delivers the final gavel strike. This court is adjourned. As Naomi's gavel falls, the room is still. The message has been delivered, loud and clear. The consequences of Chad's actions have been made crystal clear, and the next steps toward redemption and accountability have begun. As the officers file out of the room, Naomi remains seated, her gaze steady and resolute. This moment, this lesson, was not just for Chad, but for everyone in the courtroom and everyone watching. True justice doesn't just demand punishment, it demands a change in the heart and soul of those who enforce it. And for Naomi Pierce, that is the only justice worth fighting for. Chad's first day at the youth center is a quiet one. The community center is filled with the vibrant energy of teenagers, but there is a tension in the air that Chad can't quite shake. He's been assigned to help out with an after-school program, working alongside volunteers and staff to organize activities for the kids. As he watches the young people interact, it doesn't take long for him to realize the gravity of the lessons he's about to learn. One boy, in particular, catches his attention. Jaden, a 14-year-old who's clearly been through a lot. Jaden tells Chad how he's been stopped and frisked multiple times just because of the neighborhood he lives in. "You don't even have to do anything wrong," Jaden says, frustration and pain evident in his voice. "You're just a target because of how you look." Chad is stunned, his earlier ignorance coming back to him in waves. For the first time, he listens, really listens, as the kids share stories of systemic inequality, stereotyping, and the hardships they face daily. They aren't just talking about incidents they've seen or heard about. They are talking about their own lived experiences, and it's a harsh reality Chad has never truly understood. The more he listens, the more he feels the weight of his past actions. It hits him harder than any punishment or reprimand could. This was about more than just his own behavior. His actions, his biases, contributed to the very world these kids had to navigate. A few weeks later, Naomi Pierce visits the center as a guest speaker. She talks about the importance of fairness, understanding, and the power of empathy in shaping better communities. As she finishes her speech, Chad approaches her slowly, unsure of what to say but knowing this is a conversation he needs to have. "Judge Pierce," he begins, his voice quieter than usual. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong, and I'm trying to do better. I know I can't undo the harm I caused, but I want to learn, to make things right." Naomi looks at him, her gaze thoughtful. For a moment, there is silence between them. No judgment, just a shared understanding of the journey ahead. "Growth starts with accountability, Officer Reynolds," she says finally. "Keep working on it. It's a long road, but it's the only road worth walking." As she walks away, Chad stands there for a moment, absorbing her words. It's not the end of the story, but a new beginning. The work is just starting. But for the first time, Chad feels like he's on the right path. The path to redemption and to truly understanding the impact of his actions. The camera pans over the familiar street as Naomi drives home, her posture upright and confident. Her expression reflects the weight of the work she has done and the quiet, steady resolve of someone who has chosen the path of justice. The streets that once seemed divisive now feel like places of opportunity for change. As she passes through the neighborhood, the camera shifts to the youth center. Chad is seen interacting with the kids, helping them organize games and offering guidance. His face is softer now, filled with a quiet humility and a new understanding. His days of arrogance are behind him, and though his redemption journey has just begun, his willingness to learn is evident in every small interaction. Naomi's voice narrates, calm and thoughtful. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about creating opportunities for change. True power lies in accountability, growth, and the courage to do better. The camera pulls back, showing the bustling youth center, the children smiling, and the sun setting in the distance. Naomi's car fades into the background, the sense of quiet triumph and hope filling the air.